Why is a criticism of a pharmaceutical company censored when we have a metabolic health crisis among kids? There's no animals in the wild that have chronic rates of obesity and diabetes. It's just humans and animals we've domesticated and fed our diets to, like dogs. Dogs have a 60% obesity rate. What we're doing to ourselves by listening to experts is really causing a huge problem. It's driven by really broken incentives, where it's not a left versus right anymore. It's a uniparty that's totally captured by corporate interests, where there's 5 lobbyists for every member of Congress, where the head of the FDA goes straight to being on the boards of a pharmaceutical company. But let's just go through the facts. It is crazy to me that everyone in America does not understand that the ultra-processed food system, our food supply, was created by the cigarette industry in a very literal way. Now, are they trying to kill and poison Americans? No. They're trying to create cheap, addictive food. When you see those ingredients, you don't understand. Those are scientists, literally from cigarette companies, concocting the most palatable, least filling, most addictive item.
I remember my daughter turned 6 months old, and the pediatrician walked in, and she said, "Congratulations, she can now get the COVID shot."
Well, the first moment of life for a human being in this country is a pharmaceutical intervention. Antidepressant rates have doubled in the past 5 years. Every single condition you can name, autoimmune conditions, kidney disease, they're all at an all-time high this year among kids. And then the American Academy of Pediatrics is literally paid for by Coca-Cola, Cadbury, other processed food companies, and they create guidance saying that the first thing your child should eat is processed puffs, not whole foods. With whole food, it is very hard to overeat it. It's very hard to eat 15 oranges, which is the amount of sugar if you're like chugging a bunch of Coke. It's almost impossible to overeat steak. At the end of World War II, the percentage of the medical budget that we spent on chronic conditions was 0%. We didn't have a chronic disease medication. The birth control was the first one. And this industry saw, oh my gosh, for the first time, somebody can take a pill more than a couple weeks until they're cured. They can actually take it for life. And today, 95% of spending is on chronic conditions. Everything is around lifetime pills, essentially. Ozempic, statins, metformin, antidepressants are prescribed and recommended for life. They're not curing anything, they're managing.
For coming?
I'm pumped to be here.
I'm going to do a quick recap. Well, first, before I even start, I want to give a huge thanks because I can't even say their name. Because if I say their name in the first 2 minutes of a video, depending on what platform it comes on, they will shadow ban it or delete it. And you're no stranger to having controversial topics and people coming after you for things that you say. But thank you to these guys for letting us use their studio, because that's crazy. That's a thing these days.
It's a crazy world.
There are certain topics that you're not allowed to talk about, that they don't like you talking about. There are certain groups and agencies that they don't like you going after, and you go after kind of the big ones. So for people that are not familiar, Calley Means, he is a former food and pharmaceutical consultant. Started a company called TrueMed, which is how you can spend your health savings account on things like food and health rather than on preventative measures rather than cures. And also you are fighting the FDA and USDA. Two giants, so thank you for coming.
I'm pumped to be here.
I first found you on Tucker's show. That's when I first noticed you. And I think that's when a lot of people saw you and your sister together. And all of a sudden, the work that you're doing has become kind of mainstream. A lot of people are thinking about talking about it. What has that experience been like?
Honestly, I'm taking it day by day, and I feel like I'm on a spiritual journey with my sister. I mean, we talked on Tucker's show about our mom abruptly dying of a metabolic condition of cancer, and this is just accepted in the United States, but cancer rates are skyrocketing right now. Heart disease, Alzheimer's, all these conditions weren't that much of a thing like a generation ago. And we tied together our experience. My sister's experience, top of her class ever med school, being a surgeon, bravely leaving the system after seeing that she's only really trained to prescribe and cut things open and manage conditions, not to cure them. My experience working a lobbyist. So at the after my mom died, we felt like we really had something to say, and we saw something, and we felt a real mission to try to prevent these millions, I think, of unnecessary deaths at the hand of our broken healthcare incentives. So we've just been pushing that mission every day. We wrote this book, and it does feel like there's really something important to talk about, and we're really just grateful. We're grateful to be carrying on our mom's legacy and talking about it. And I do think it's tapping in, and we're just two foot soldiers in this mission to talk about these things. But like the fact that our largest institution, our most powerful institution, the healthcare industry, and it is the largest part of GDP. It's the fastest growing industry, which is amazing. The fact that just demonstrably that industry is incentivized for more Americans to be sick is a huge, huge problem. And there's a lot of good people in that industry, but that fact, once you realize it, I don't think you can get out of your head. And I think it's really an example of this corruption and this frustration people feel with institutions. It's really driving our politics, really politics around the world, this populist frustration. And we're trying to we really did feel like there was a way to channel that issue. And I'm glad it's being talked about.
Because when you started this journey and after your mom passed, you wrote this book and you started your mission, but in the last 2 weeks, it's kind of ramped up. I mean, does it feel different? Do you feel more pressure? Do you feel like there's more attacks against you? I mean, what's that experience been like in this big shift?
I grew up in DC. I grew up a couple blocks away from here. I worked for, presidential campaigns, politicians, been thinking about this stuff for a while. And one thing is that, it never works on a political campaign to be thinking about yourself that much. It's really about the mission, about people. When we wrote this book, like every single day we asked, like, how do we make this about like what people are feeling? So like, I really do feel like, honestly, not much has changed. We've been preparing and really felt like we have something important to say. And I think the reason this is being talked about is because there's so many voices that are coming to the same conclusion. And I think it's really politically resonant issue because to me, it all ties to kids. I mean, there's like something fueling this frustration when, 50% of teens are overweight or obese. 20% of teens have fatty liver disease. You talk to any parent and what's happening with mental health is just not normal. And then you trace that to the fact that kids and parents aren't, suicidal and lazy. There's some incentives that are the problem. So, I credit Casey's genius, honestly, for being able to communicate this as a physician, and I certainly tried to help with that. But I just think we have been tapping into what I think is the biggest issue in the country. I mean, you talked about kind of being censored, what's selectively censored. It's like, why is a criticism of a pharmaceutical company censored, but this video is probably going to be running ads for processed food when we have a metabolic health crisis among kids? And it's almost censored if you try to lecture Americans on diet for kids, but there's no cost too great and no nuance you can give whatsoever on pharmaceutical products. It's like this selective censoring is really problematic once you start unwinding it. You got to ask why.
I mean, my daughter is 2 years old, so I think about this stuff all the time. And she loves going to ride the train, the choo-choo train at the mall. So we're at the mall at least once a week because she wants to ride the train around in circles. And walking around, I think anyone can notice there's something wrong. Just in walking around, teenagers, they're like, something's not right here. You can see it in kind of the kids. I remember my daughter turned 6 months old, and the pediatrician walked in, and she said, "Congratulations, she can now get the COVID shot." And I was like, "No, that's not. I'm not okay with that." And she was like, "No, like it's amazing news." I'm like, how many people are convinced that? I mean, the pediatrician walked in and said, "Congratulations. Congratulations, she can get her next round of boosters. Congratulations, you can do these next group of shots. You can do these next vaccines. Hey, you're having dietary issues. Why don't you try this type of food? Why don't you try this? Why don't you try this ointment?" And we're looking at it like, I don't feel like a doctor should give me this, number one. Number two, I don't want to give it to my kid. They're pushing at you at the very core level, which is pediatricians.
Well, the first moment of life for a human being in this country is a pharmaceutical intervention. All right. Upon birth, upon coming out of the womb, within seconds, antibiotic ointment is spread across the child's eyes. That's just mandatory, essentially. And then within the first hours of birth, it's the Hep B shot, which is an STD. Hep B is an STD or intravenous. You get through intravenous needles through drug use. There's no documented cases of any other ways people getting it than that, and the mom is tested for it. So we desensitize, I think, Americans within the first hours of birth, and then as the pediatric industry is overseeing a metabolic health crisis among children, as I mentioned, where statin rates have doubled in prescriptions, antidepressant rates have doubled in the past 5 years. Metformin is now being prescribed to high schoolers like candy. The obesity, every single condition you can name, autoimmune conditions, kidney disease, they're all at an all-time high this year among kids. And that's driving 90 to 95% of medical spending. It's driving really the bulk of what's torturing Americans. And yet pediatricians don't talk about that. They're actually not weighing kids anymore because they've been through a whole TikTok campaign funded by processed food companies. Doctors don't weigh people. They don't talk about weight, even though 100 years ago, an average person you see at the mall today in America, they literally, an overweight person was in the circus 100 years ago. Like it was so rare. There were case reports written about obese people. Doctors wouldn't see them over their entire career. So in the midst of this kind of happening among kids, all pediatric medicine is whether you're taking pharmaceuticals, and then the American Academy of Pediatrics, which gives them basically required reading on dietary interventions, is literally paid for by Coca-Cola, Cadbury, other processed food companies, and they create guidance saying that the first thing your child should eat is processed puffs, not whole food. So yeah, we've really got some really tough incentives there. And I think our point in the book is when it comes to chronic conditions, anything that's not going to kill your kid right away, but is like a long-term issue like high cholesterol, blood sugar, mental health, the medical system does not deserve your trust. If you have an acute problem, if something's going to kill your kid right away, if something's like an infection or it's some kind of acute illness, the medical system is a miracle. That's 5% of medical spending right now. The medical system has completely lost their way on chronic conditions, and we really should not be trusting the system on that. And we should be taking a big pause when our doctors are trying to push a pharmaceutical or dietary advice on our kids.
But how do we combat that? Because the institutions of health, of pharmaceuticals, they are so big in our society. They run and they decide pretty much everything that our children are eating, watching, everything. How do we combat that? Because as a young parent, I think about that constantly. What do I do for my kid if I can't trust my doctor?
Well, health isn't in the doctor's office. I think the idea of chronic disease management being in the doctor's office is a huge, we've lost our way on that. You look at the founding fathers, hundreds of years ago, they lived till their 70s and 80s. When you look at life expectancy, it's really about infectious diseases and childhood mortality. We actually had strong immune system for hundreds of years. And if you can kind of get through not getting an infection and not dying in childbirth, you actually usually lived a long time. So Peter T has talked about this in his book, if you take out infectious diseases and acute diseases, life expectancy really hasn't grown in the past 100 years. So there's this misnomer that there's been medical miracles to help with chronic conditions. What's actually happened is there was so much trust after World War II where penicillin, antibiotics, some emergency surgical procedures were credited with helping to win the war. The medical system very strategically took that trust where science, trust was at an all-time high post-World War II, and then started shifting to chronic disease. So at the end of World War II, the percentage of the medical budget that we spent on chronic conditions was 0%. We didn't have a chronic disease medication. The birth control was the first one. And this industry saw, oh my gosh, for the first time, somebody can take a pill more than a couple of weeks until they're cured. They can actually take it for life. And today, 95% of spending is on chronic conditions. Everything is around lifetime pills, essentially. Ozempic, statins, metformin, antidepressants are prescribed and recommended for life. They're not curing anything, they're managing. So we've taken that and just lost our way on chronic conditions. So to your point, what is a person to do? Well, this is why I think the issue is resonating. This is not a left-right issue. It's actually like a cultural and spiritual problem in the country. Like the fact that we're all like so poisoned that we're becoming overweight and developing these unprecedented rates of chronic conditions and not at our best is a huge problem. And what do? I don't know. Look at every other animal in the world. Like, there's no animals in the wild that have chronic rates of obesity and diabetes. It's just humans and animals we've domesticated and fed our diets to, like dogs. Dogs have a 60% obesity rate, and they measure depression on dogs. They have over a 50% depression rate. Wolves in the wild aren't obese or depressed. Like what we're doing to ourselves by listening to experts is really causing huge problems. It's driven by really broken incentives. So I think, again, this kind of hits on, I think, a larger trend where it's not a left versus right anymore. It's a uniparty that's totally captured by corporate interests, where there's 5 lobbyists for every member of Congress, where the head of the FDA goes straight to being on the boards of pharmaceutical companies, where literally the lifeblood of funding of politicians, of the media itself, of YouTube ads, of really any institution we trust is money from this industry. It's created this gaslighting where parents feel like they can't even, use common sense in what they feed their kids. So that's where this really becomes, I think, a cultural issue where we need to totally unwind ourselves here. We need to eat whole food. Like, we need to encourage our kids to move and be out in the sun. Like we need to see that as part of medicine. There's no ideology dictating that the $4.5 trillion we spend on healthcare need to wait for people to get sick and then drug them. Like, that doesn't even make sense. It's not ideological. Like, that money, just take the 4.5 trillion, should be going towards thriving and health and disease prevention of the American people. There's just much better ways to spend this. And that's what I'm working on. You mentioned TrueMed. It's like where the rubber hits the road is just incentives. Like, we have these flexible savings accounts. That should go to the clinically appropriate intervention for what we're facing. The clinically appropriate intervention, if somebody is obese, is not to jab them with the toxin for life, Ozempic. It's to, help them on incentivize better lifestyle habits. It's just like we're just blinded from the clinical reality of like what we're facing.
And you said the word poison.
Yeah.
Is that intentional, or do you think that's just a byproduct of capitalism and greed? Right. I mean, right. How much intent is that, and how evil is that intent? I guess is really the question.
It's a great question. So I think myself, for most of my life, my sister at Stanford Med School, a lot of smart people watching this is like, okay, hyperbolic words, poison. I know people in the food industry and the pharma industry, it's not that bad. But let's just go through the facts. It is crazy to me that everyone in America does not understand that the ultra-processed food system, our food supply, was created by the cigarette industry in a very literal way.
That's crazy.
It is. Every single student should be taught this. If you look at the health trends of Americans, it's very clear. It started around, the mid-1980s, okay? So the mid-1980s, it's very analogous actually to what we need to be doing with food, but the Surgeon General, decades too late, started coming down on smoking, right? And that's a key point. Our science, forget the policy, our scientific authorities have respect and should say the truth. So the Surgeon Generals in the mid-1980s said smoking was really problematic for the first time. So smoking rates started going down. Cigarette companies were the largest companies in the world and actually had the largest cash piles, the largest balance sheets of any company in human history. So they very strategically started buying food companies. So the go-go 1980s, where we have like Wall Street and other movies about all the deals happening, the 2 largest deals in world history up to 1990 were cigarette companies buying food companies. So you had R.J. Nabisco, you had R.J. Reynolds buy Nabisco, which was a famous book, Barbarians at the Gate, about like the origins of the private equity industry. And then you had Philip Morris buy Kraft and U.S. Foods, some of the biggest deals in world history, M&A deals. So by 1990, the 2 largest food companies in the world were cigarette companies. So they took their scientists very strategically and shifted them from the declining cigarette department to the food department. And they then used their lobbyists to push the USDA to allow thousands of chemicals into our food supply that are banned in other countries. Now, are they trying to kill and poison Americans? No. They're trying to create cheap, addictive food. And that is the problem with ultra-processed food. When you see those ingredients, you don't understand. Those are scientists, literally from cigarette companies, concocting the most palatable, least filling, most addictive item possible. It's a science experiment literally by cigarette industry researchers to make us want to eat the food and hijack our biology. With whole food, it is very hard to overeat it. It's very hard to eat 15 oranges, which is the amount of sugar if you're like chugging a bunch of Coke. It's almost impossible to overeat steak or broccoli. These food over thousands and thousands of years in evolution, are connected with our bodies and, trigger satiety signals. Ultra-processed food short circuits that. It contains ingredients that are new in the past 100 years. The primary and 3 ingredients of our diet, seed oils, added sugar, and highly processed grains, didn't exist 100 years ago. So they weaponized the food with the science and then rigged the institutions of trust like they did with the cigarette industry, leading to the food pyramid in the 1990s, which led to an explosion of ultra-processed food consumption. So I, as a lobbyist on the conservative side of the aisle 15 years ago around this town here, was saying any infringement on the food companies was an attack on the free market. That was BS. They have rigged the market. They paid millions of dollars to Harvard to produce studies in the 70s and 80s and 90s saying sugar doesn't cause obesity. They then used those studies with Harvard to go to the USDA and buy them off to do a processed food marketing document, the food pyramid. And, all of our parents in the 90s thought it was just totally fine to feed their kids ultra-processed food, right? And that was actually following government guidelines. This was a very deliberate strategy. At the same time, the medical organizations like the American Diabetes Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, were not calling this out. They were taking money from food companies. I mean, it is still just astounding to me that 90% of the American Diabetes Association funding comes from food companies and pharma companies. They create the standard of care for obesity. Until 2018, their official guidance was that a diabetic doesn't have to change their diet. Their official guidance was that a diabetic can eat as much sugar as they want. They can drink Coca-Cola. They've actually been funded by Coca-Cola. And they said as long as a person takes their drugs, a diabetic can eat whatever they want. So there's been a lack of just not only silence, but complicitness. And as we become basically poisoned by food, the medical industry has profited from that. If you look at cancer rates in 1985, when the Surgeon General report came out, they've gone up an order of magnitude. So I joke about this, but it's true. We'd be much healthier if the cigarette companies went back to making cigarettes and not getting to our food. So yeah, it's been very deliberate.
I just saw this random study that popped up in my feed somewhere about Tufts.
Yeah.
And they said that Cocoa Puffs is healthier for you than ground beef.
Right. So this is the key point on that. It's funny, but at the top of that study, it says the point of the study is to influence childhood nutrition and marketing guidelines.
What does that even mean?
The stated purpose of the study is to achieve, they call it the most comprehensive dietary guidance ever conducted. That was what the report was heralded as, in order for governments to use this on marketing guidelines and nutrition guidelines for kids. So we hear about this study with the Tufts Nutrition School, which is one of the top nutrition schools in the country, and the NIH seal on it. Tufts Nutrition School, the person that did the study, Darius Mozaffarian, is the chair of the Biden Nutrition Council, very prominent guy. And that study comes out. He went to governments around the world. Believe it or not, they used that study in Africa to push marketing guidelines saying that cereal was safe. I mean, Africa is very concerned about nutrition and developing countries because they just can't afford the medical budget for exploding diabetes rates. And he actually went around the world to use that report saying, no, you don't need to come down on cereals. It's so funny seeing Lucky Charms is healthier than eggs, and dozens of name brand cereals, with added sugar as recommended, and grass-fed steak as discouraged. But the second that comes out, you're working for the food industry, you jam that down Congress' throat. You jam that to school boards. That's the point of these studies, because you can go into Congress, and I meet with them all the time now. And I was speaking recently to a member who's a military guy, very passionate about health and on one of the health committees. And I'm like, how does this all happen? How do we have such a dysfunctional system? He goes, well, this is not my issue. Like, I'm not a nutritionist. And they come in every day, the lobbyists and people, and they just have studies, Tufts Nutrition School, Harvard, and it's just like, it's basically this implicit threat that if he starts litigating any type of nutrition guideline, they'll just slap him with another study and call him anti-science. So what this preponderance of all these, studies and all this confusion do is just basically paralyze anyone, from disagreeing with it. And that's what they do at school boards. Like, the point of that study is shown when you go into a school and they're not serving farm fresh eggs, they're serving Lucky Charms, right?
Which is crazy.
That's the point. So it's funny, but it's like, that's literally immediately at a school board. And it's like, it's basically giving cover for that school to be giving their kids sugar-laden cereal. Just last thing, Reese's Puffs, Reese's Pieces cereal was a recommended item.
And they had brand names on there.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just generic cereals. They had literal brand names, which is, I didn't see that one coming too. It's specific.
No, extreme. They had dozens of brand names,
and no one sees
including
that?
Reese's Puffs. Well, we saw it, and my co-founder Justin Mares and I wrote a Substack post and draw attention to it, and then Joe Rogan drew attention to it from something we posted, and then it kind of went viral. So you couldn't even make it up. But the study's author called me from Davos. He was on a panel actually promoting the study to people around the world about how cereal is healthy. And he started screaming at me. So he's in the hallways. He got my number, called me, and he started questioning my credentials. He said, "You don't know how this works." I said, "Sir, I have one question. Cheerios was rated as better than organic quinoa as a grain. Are you saying that the grains in Cheerios or Lucky Charms are as good as organic quinoa or some like whole natural grain?" He's like, "Yes, I do. I think that grain in Lucky Charms is as healthy as the most natural grain because they fortify it with vitamins and fortify it with other good things, which is a great advancement. And I would absolutely recommend somebody eating Reese's Puffs grains as much as any other whole grain." And I asked him, does the fact that you have been paid personal consulting payments, not research grants, but his conflicts of interest is a laundry list of personal bribes, I consider them, to him from food companies, from Ozempic distributor. Does this impact your guidance? Plus the fact that your school, Tufts Nutrition School, is majority funded by food companies. The food industry spends 11 times more on research than the NIH. Does that impact your judgment? He laughed at me and said, "You don't know how the world works. How dare you ever suggest that would impact my judgment? This is just the way it works, that we're funded the majority by food companies. There wouldn't be nutrition research otherwise. And of course not." And that's an outlandish implication. So he then threatened me and said, we know some of the same people at Stanford where we both went, and basically threatened to, if I kept rocking the boat, that he was going to talk to some of our mutual acquaintances at Stanford, which is, is always part of the game to threaten club membership if you happen to be advocating for children not poisoning themselves with added sugar. So, it was a educational experience.
And that's crazy, because isn't this an issue that most people should be able to get around? Because you're talking about children. You're not talking about, vaccinating older generations of people, which it's not good, but it's not the same. We're talking about children.
Yeah, and I want to be clear because again, I used to be on the I still consider myself a conservative, and it's like you start getting into are we starting to lecture Americans what to eat? Are we starting to? No, I am saying one thing, and this is what I'm talking to anyone who will listen. The Trump campaign, RFK, Democrats I'm meeting with. This is my point. This is not about lecturing a parent what to feed their children. It's a step above that I think we all can agree on. Tufts Nutrition School and the NIH should not be recommending Reese's Puffs to 2-year-olds when we have a metabolic health crisis. We need to get the science right. The problem is that in America, we listen to scientific guidelines. For better or worse, right? When Dr. Fauci told us to get the shot, more than 90% of Americans got at least one shot. Right? When the Surgeon General came out with the smoking guidelines, smoking rates went down. My entire strategy and my core message is something we can all agree on, which is that the USDA should not be accepting money from food companies, which they do. The USDA advisors are able to accept money from food companies. 19 out of 20 USDA Nutrition Advisory Committee members are paid for by food companies. And today, as chronic disease is destroying our youngest generation, the USDA says that a 2-year-old can have 10% of their diet be added sugar, which is inexcusable. You have the NIH, the majority of grants that the NIH doles out are to people with conflicts. There's essentially zero foundational research that's happening at the NIH. The NIH is doling out 40 times more grants to study pharmaceutical treatments for cancer rather than study why people are getting cancer. Cancer is a preventable condition. There's no money being studied on what actually causes cancer. It's all to help pharmaceutical companies profit from exploding cancer rates. There is a cure for cancer. My mom died of pancreatic cancer. It was not a thing 50 years ago. Pancreatic cancer is a foodborne illness. Breast cancer is essentially a metabolic condition. Breast cancer rates are exploding. The research on tying that to prediabetes, diabetes, blood sugar dysregulation is astounding. Nobody talks about this. The links between many forms of cancer and food is as closely tied as smoking is to lung cancer. Sure, you can get them in some cases, but it's not random. Getting cancer and many forms of cancer is not random. It's totally predictable. If you are meeting the 5 qualifications of proper metabolic functioning, you have a dramatically lower chance of getting cancer. So there's not that type of research or communication coming from our medical authorities because they're completely co-opted by accepting the fact that we're just poisoning ourselves and getting sick and then profiting from it. Then getting to the FDA itself, which is 75% funded by Pharma, the department that approves drugs. So it's fundamentally incentivized for the pharmaceutical industry to grow. If you can just get these incentives, which are very easy to attack, out of our foundational regulatory and scientific guideline authorities, then I'm fine where the policy falls. But the problem is members of Congress are literally getting reports saying Reese's Puffs are healthy for kids. You just attack the corruption, the policy will follow. That's my framework.
I feel like we've been through this before when we had the food pyramid and everyone had an uproar. Can't believe the entire base of the food pyramid is cereal. And they scrapped and they said, no, we messed that up. That was wrong. But we're in the same exact spot we were 30 years ago when they said, oh, just kidding, that food pyramid was wrong. Why has no one learned?
I mean, I think part of it is that we have a mass addiction crisis. I think we have a visible addiction crisis with how overweight Americans are. And I think the food industry lies on the fact that, really, it's really sad when you go to an airport or go to a mall and look at how much Americans are struggling with their health. It's nobody wants to be this fat and visibly sick and not able to live a thriving life. I mean, it's just like, it's actually like really dystopian when you think about it. And so I think those folks are being really let down with our compromised food supply and with our scientific guidelines, and now with the medical industry being bought off and literally now saying obesity is genetic and not tied to a lifestyle and just accepting it. But I also think it's hard for people to admit they're doing something wrong. And I think you do have a dynamic, unfortunately, where you have a lot of very sick, traumatized adults who are then passing those habits on to kids and actually subconsciously, because they're making not great decisions, like want to normalize their behavior by giving kids bad food. I mean, just demonstrably, if you're feeding your kid an ultra processed food diet, high in added sugars, you're poisoning your child. Like you are setting them up just demonstrably for a suboptimal life. If a child is if a child's diabetic by the time they're 30, they're going to live 16 years on average younger than a regular American. now 33% of young adults have prediabetes. If your child is overweight, they're going to be 3 times more likely to be depressed or suicidal. So we really are really setting our kids back. And I think a part of it is that parents are so addicted and so sick, and that just influences the family dynamics. Why would a parent change their habits for their kids if they're so yeah, I think it's a cultural reset that we need. What I think is really powerful about pointing out the corruption is we're never going to convince the American people that they're doing something wrong to their kids. Like 80% of adults almost are overweight or obese, and then kids are tracking well, with that. We have to rally the American people towards that our institutions have been really compromised, and get them, I think, rightfully angry about that, and have a discussion about a reset. We have a mass drug addiction crisis with our food. It's the most important addiction crisis in the country. And I think having a conversation through the lens of addiction, and do we actually need to unwind this like almost addiction that's happened by our food being weaponized is important. But it's hard for a lot of people to see because it's so omnipresent.
It's literally everywhere.
Yeah.
I try to take my daughter and drop her off in the Sunday school portion of church.
Right.
And they're giving my kid juice boxes and cupcakes and crackers or cookies. We're like, no, we don't want her to have any of this stuff.
Yeah.
But they're giving it. We try to take her to like a preschool, and everyone's supposed to bring snacks, and they're handing out snacks to all these kids. And we're like, all right, we can't send her here because we don't want to be feeding her all these snacks all day long. Everywhere you take your kid, they are just feeding it to them.
Well, that gets to the addiction crisis. So I actually, this has been a huge interest of mine, just psychologically, what the hell is happening. So I actually have spoken to a number of people that lead daycare facilities and early childhood education, because it's wild. I mean the degree,
and I'm not giving it to them. I don't want her to have it.
No,
but
the degree, yeah,
they're pushing it.
So if you just look at highest level, it just like, if you don't addict someone to drugs, they don't want the drugs. Like kids have gone out through most of human history not like eating processed crap that's like basically a delivery mechanism for like sugar to hit their bloodstream and like have them wanting more. Again, the problem with the cigarette industry moving to food is that they now have a product. As a drug dealer, you want to get people hooked early and you want to get them hooked for life. It's like they literally, based on the government guidance, start giving this food to 6-month-olds, right? That's loaded with added sugar and then also processed, so it's very palatable. So the problem is that parents, by basically following the recommendations, have gotten their kids addicted to this food, which is designed for them to be addicted. And what the daycare administrators tell me is that there's no other way for them to control the kids. It's literally a bunch of drug addicts. So the kids, I mean, think about like all we have to do is look at ourselves. Look at an adult. Our day is dictated by dopamine. Like an average American, all of us, if we're honest, are like rats that are going from one like dopamine hit to the next. Whatever it is, it's whether it's coffee or scrolling on social media or porn, which is still like 30% of internet bandwidth, or drinking or drugs. It's like, if we're all honest with ourselves, we're all sex, chasing success, whatever. We're all in this like maze trying to find the next dopamine hit. Like that's true for kids too. So we shouldn't be judging those kids. Like look at an adult, look at ourselves if we're honest with ourselves, if we're like pounding, processed food and it's hard to stop. So how do we expect a 2-year-old to stop? It's like, so they go crazy. They have addiction withdrawals. When they're eating this food and you do a brain scan, it's the exact same reward pathways as taking an illicit drug. So because we have that normalization, daycares see food as a way to placate kids because they literally lose their minds if they don't get it. So that's what the daycare facilitators tell me. It's like their little helper. It's like the way to placate. And I think that's what's happened with parents too, with processed food. And I think it's absolutely just shameful at a moral blind spot that, just TikTok after TikTok and all this communication just normalizes this. Oh, you can't possibly, control what your kid eats. Like all this normalization. We need a Surgeon General to speak plainly and say that we need a reset, a spiritual, cultural health reset for our children. That the scientific guidance is that a parent is essentially committing child abuse for pounding added sugar down their 2-year-old's throat. And the health authority should not be worried about practicability, should not be worried about social justice concerns about affordability of food. That should not be in their purview. It is right now. It should not be in their purview. They should say the truth, which is that we need a reset and stop force feeding ultra-processed food, especially sugar, down our 2-year-olds' throats. Then policy and culture can come from that. But I can tell you, parents are followers. Right now, that daycare where they're giving everyone all that food is following guidelines. All that artificial colorings, all the glyphosate on those grains, it's poisoning our kids, but it's following guidelines. We have to have the medical authorities lead, and it's the medical authorities' job to say the truth. It's interesting to me that, as we mentioned, when it comes to following a rigorous pharmaceutical schedule for kids, no cost is too high. And there's no, single moms can't afford that or don't have time. It's like, no, you are an awful person if you don't follow an exact rigid schedule. But it's all, when it comes to food, when it comes to poisoning our kids, it's, no, a single mom can't afford, a lower income person is too stupid to have an ID to vote and too stupid, to not poison their kids. like how could we possibly expect these dumb, poor people to buy anything other than Lunchables for their kids? It's like, that's the type of mindset we have towards the American people. We need more respect and more clarity, the same clarity the medical system speaks to parents to follow a pharmaceutical schedule. We need that type of clarity about what our kids should be putting in their bodies. That can happen very quickly. And I just trust that culture and policy will flow from leadership, from the scientists.
But even for people that are kind of aware and they know what's going on and they're trying to be mindful of what their children eat or what they consume. And then I go to the grocery store and says, well, this is organic.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know. I don't even know what that means anymore. That word is so easily used. And it's supposed to be organic. It's supposed to be the healthier version. You're looking at the ingredient list and it is so long. There's no way to decide what's in there.
Right.
I don't understand half the words.
Right.
So there's no way for me to know.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, my sister and I are obviously on this mission. We went to my dad's, refrigerator a year or two ago, and he had the organic creamer, and it was like really specially branded from Whole Foods. I think it was like almond milk, and then the first ingredient is canola oil. It's literally not even the almond milk. It's really, really hard. I think this is one reason the book is resonating. This book, we're talking a lot about top-down change. The top-down change is going to be spurred by this bottoms-up revolution. I really do think a lot of viewers, a lot of people, especially with kids, are on this. I call it a spiritual journey to really understand how we've been really misled and get back to like making sure our kids' bodies get the right inputs. So I think one of the reasons the book's doing well is we have really detailed shopping lists. We get really tactical. I told our editors, I'm like, I don't want to have a shopping list. It's like, it's been one of the most popular part of the book. We really get very tactical on how to create, a grocery list and how to think about navigating that, because it's really hard. But here's a couple frameworks. I'll go back to the unholy trinity I mentioned. If you scan that label, you want to look for 3 ingredients. So added sugars, there's over 50 names of added sugar, and we have them in the book. But added sugar, you don't want. Seed oils, so canola oil, soybean oil, these are the top source of American calories right now.
Does avocado oil fall in that, by the way?
Avocado oil is okay, and then olive oil is okay, butter, ghee, but no, seed oils, we list them all in the book. But canola oil, soybean oil, safflower oil are some of the main ones. If you see seed oils, that company doesn't really like you. Like that's a tell that they're really not thinking.
It's that bad.
Yeah. I think if you have an organic branded product and then see canola oil, there are an increasing amount of brands now, like Siete, like Primal Kitchen, that don't include seed oils, and this is going to become more and more of a trend. There's a lot of talk about seed oils, but the fundamental premise is this is a highly processed oil. It's not natural. It's not, our bodies is not made to process it. It's literally a byproduct from oil production that was used as an engine lubricant by John D. Rockefeller, who then lobbied to have it safe for human consumption because he saw he could literally make money out of using the byproduct of the engine lubricant to put in food. I mean, that's literally how this is not something that's as widely used in Europe. It's very looked down on. It's rancid. If you Google how the seed oils are made, it's really disgusting, as opposed to olive oil, which is just squeezing olives if it's made correctly. So fundamentally, you've got seed oils, you've got added sugars, and then you've got processed grains. Now, processed grains started with good intentions after World War II to make the food shelf stable, but it's been a disaster. The processing takes the fiber off, which is a big part of the nutritional value, and it's been so pulverized and processed that these are basically just hidden sugars. In addition, I think in the U.S., covered with glyphosate, and I think I think our grains are highly problematic. We all hear about those stories of people going to Europe, eating a bunch of pasta and losing weight. So I'd really try to stay away from the processed grains. If you can, and that's like enriched wheat and anything dealing with enriched flour or enriched wheat on the label. So if you can look at those 3 ingredients, you're going to actually get 80% there. So that's what I'd say on the ingredient list. Like, you're going to probably have brands that love you a little bit better if you get those 3 out. And we have specific brands in the book. But I do think we need a national reckoning from the top, from the Secretary of Defense, because 77% of people aren't eligible to join the military who are 21 right now, from the Secretary of the Treasury, because we're going to go bankrupt with healthcare costs, from the president. We need a national call to action that we got to get back to basics on whole food. I mean, we've got to get back to where, frankly, Japan or some countries in Europe, they're close to 20% of their diet. We're getting closer to 70% ultra processed food. So if we can just get back to whole food, to seafood is part of our medical budget. I mean, getting back to basics on food will save us trillions of dollars of healthcare costs, because 9 out of 10 killers of Americans are essentially food-related metabolic conditions. So that's where the rubber hits the road. And I feel for parents who are busy, and single moms. But again, we need some leadership. I mean, we're poisoning our kids. We've totally lost our way with kind of the convenience of processed food and thinking that's okay. And we need to just have the clinical discussion about that. And if we can take 70% down to closer to 20% of ultra processed food consumption, our country would be transformed.
But a lot of people watching and listening are going, Calley, I get it, it's bad for you, but it's expensive.
Right.
To get whole foods, we try to go to the farmer's market once a week, try to get whole food, try to get vegetables and fruits.
Right.
It's significantly more expensive.
Yeah.
And that's the pushback for a lot of people. And I get it. We want to try to figure out a solution where we can help everyone, but the reality is it's either bad or it's good. And it's bad.
Right. Well, let's get to top down. So there's bottoms up. The most popular books in the country, the most popular podcasts from Joe Rogan to you on down are essentially about metabolic health, about chronic disease. This is what people are thinking about. People are searching out information, working on better decisions with their family. That's great. Top down. This is what I've been working on with anyone who'll listen. And I want to tell everyone, I actually think it is very possible and can happen very quickly. And I anyone who'll listen to me, and I've been speaking with, a number of the folks in the conversation right now, it's a 3-point plan. We've talked a lot about it already. Get corruption out of the medical guidelines. The science has to be right. Because if there's a report saying the truth, I think, about glyphosate, which is that it is a neurotoxin and causing irreparable harm to our microbiomes and our children's future, like, we can make it work. I mean, we're sending God knows how much money to Ukraine. We've spent trillions of dollars on COVID protocols. If the science is accurate, so get the science right. I just cannot stress that enough. I want to report on artificial colorings, what they're doing to our kids. I want to report on glyphosate. We want to report on ultra-processed food, maybe like the Surgeon General did with the smoking. We need scientific documentation that's not corrupt. That's point number one. Point number two is attack the incentives. The fact that non-poison food is demonstrably more expensive than poison food makes no sense. It's not the free market. It is not the free market when 10% of all food stamps are going to sugar water, are going to soda. The number one item on food stamps, which 10% of the American people, the neediest Americans, depend on for their basic nutrition, goes to soda. It's not right that 60% of food stamps go to ultra-processed food. This is not what they do in Europe. This is suicidal policy to be shoving addictive, toxic, non-nutritious crap down lower-income kids' throats so that they rack up trillions of dollars of health concerns later on. We spend $1.5 trillion on Medicaid, on the program for lower-income folks. We spend more to treat people with metabolic disorders on Medicaid than the defense budget. Okay? So we're poisoning our kids with ultra-processed food and soda on food stamps, and then spending, over the next 10 years, tens of trillions of dollars to clean up the mess. It makes zero sense. Michelle Obama was right early on about the school lunches. One of the top sources of calories for children is federally subsidized school lunch programs. There are no nutrition guidelines, literally none. There is no sugar protocols. There's no you can only have this much added sugar. There is zero firm guidelines on federal school lunch subsidies, which just doesn't make sense. I mean, whether you're conservative or liberal, if you're going to spend $130 billion a year on food stamps, you shouldn't be poisoning lower income people. It is perfectly appropriate to have an opinion on where that money should go to. That is not a free market. It is a totally rigged market. And then, of course, agriculture subsidies. 90+% of ag subsidies, and we spend more subsidizing our agriculture than the rest of the world combined, go to the components of ultra-processed food, corn, soy, wheat. Less than 1% go to fruits and vegetables, which are considered a specialty crop. So we have a totally rigged agriculture subsidy system that's basically forcing farmers into industrial farming, ultra-processed food system. So very quickly, clean up the incentives. Why is an avocado so much more expensive than, a bag of crap that's super processed? Okay, that's number two. That can happen almost immediately. And number three is flexibility with healthcare dollars. So I don't think people fully understand how one size fits all our system is. So think about somebody that's pre-diabetic. They're getting on government paid, often metformin for life. If you have heart disease, you're getting government paid statins for life. Now, if you're obese, you're getting probably Ozempic for life. If you're depressed, you're getting SSRIs for life. So we're spending an inordinate amount of money on this care. And by not curing the root cause of the diabetes, right, which is metabolic dysfunction, and just pilling one biomarker, people are going to rack up other comorbidities and get sicker and rack up more costs. So that's the system we're on. Why I think HSAs are such an important part of the solution, these health savings accounts, these flexible accounts, is that then allows that patient, when they're pre-diabetic, to use their medical dollars for other items. So again, I am not lecturing what a patient and a doctor should decide on to treat their specific conditions. What I'm emphatically saying is we should not have a one-size-fits-all system. That patient often right now, unless they have an HSA, can't explore other routes, like potentially using their HSA for food, exercise, supplementation. With COVID, we saw this. People were very vitamin D deficient, and if you did simple vitamin D supplementation, it was a very effective intervention. That's the case with almost every condition. If you do a blood test and use your HSA dollars for more in-depth functional medicine blood tests, you'll inevitably see that you have some nutrient deficiencies and have some personalized issues that it's not a drug deficiency. You can solve with supplementation, you can solve with exercise, you can solve with food, and you can work on a plan with your doctor to do that. This is not like lecturing people about eating, but it's like, that's just clinically the right thing to do. So I think healthcare policy needs to trust the American patient, trust that they're not trying to be lazy and kill themselves, and trust that they can be empowered to work with medical providers to get to the right answer and not have just a drug shoved down their throat for chronic conditions. So a big push, it's in the Republican platform right now, that the central tenet of healthcare policy is benefit, flexibility, expansion, and chronic disease prevention. It's something that is being talked about across the political aisle. But if we can shift more of that $4.5 trillion, from a one-size-fits-all system where, as I said, Medicaid is just, paying out for drug annuities, where, a diabetic person at 30 years old is costing the U.S. taxpayer millions, literally millions of dollars with other comorbidities. What if we shifted Medicaid itself to a flexible account where a lower-income single mom, if she's dealing with prediabetes and then her kid is obese, can actually work with medical providers to use this substantial amount of money we're already spending to potentially do a more personalized plan to get their kid healthier for life? That'd be a much better system. So those are the 3 tiers. Get corruption out, work on flexibility, and then fix the incentives.
Well, right now with your health savings account, you can't do that, right? You have to use it through the doctors and the hospitals and et cetera.
Well, what TrueMed does, what my company does, is you actually can use it for exercise supplements and food in many cases with a doctor's note. So there's walls put up, and we're the first company to really realize this. We just went into the tax law and started the company with this idea of what is, and this is what it all gets down to, what is medicine? Like my sister, when she made a dietary intervention to a patient who had chronic migraines, her attending surgeon at Stanford said, "Don't be a pussy." Literally used that phrase and said, "We didn't go to dietary school. Serious medicine is interventions." Like we're trained that, and doctors are trained, and really societally, that nutrition and supplementation, exercise isn't serious medicine. It's only cutting people over or prescription pad. That's not right. And it's actually not how medicine is defined. So the IRS tax code defines medicine as what a doctor says is useful in preventing or reversing a condition. So, and then there's been a lot of case law on this. So if a doctor recommends food or recommends exercise interventions or recommends supplementation or recommends a sauna or recommends other root cause items, it does count for medical spending. And the fact that this is news to people, the fact that very educated people, nobody knows this, we're working to evangelize it. That is a black mark on the medical industry. I just want to be very clear, and this is under current law. It is an absolute scandal that the hundreds of millions of meetings in the United States between a doctor and a patient when an American is showing the first signs of metabolic dysfunction, that it's an immediate prescription pad and a statin, an SSRI. 25% of women are on some kind of psychiatric drug in this country. Like it's just boom, boom. The fact that they're trying to shove Ozempic down our throats as the standard of care for 12-year-olds who are overweight or obese, it's like this is just not clinically appropriate. And that doctor, I believe, who's lunging for the Ozempic or the statin or the metformin prescription before doing what they have every ability to do, which is take out a piece of paper and write a letter of medical necessity with a detailed dietary or exercise plan that then unlocks tax-free spending and medical spending, that could be done right now under current law. So what I would recommend is you expand flexible accounts and actually shift a lot of the budget into those accounts. So, people on Medicaid, lower income people, HSAs are a tax advantaged vehicle. A lot of them don't really even pay taxes. But if they have an account, again, then I would be working on shifting this broken top-down system of that $1.5 trillion of Medicaid that I mentioned. Start putting more of that money into people's accounts and trust that mom to make the right decision for her kids. There's just this pessimism towards the American people.
If you give it to them, they're gonna mess it up. They're gonna waste it. They're not gonna know what it is. We know better because we're the government and we're the institution. And we'll figure it out for you.
It happens with schools, right? This is very similar to school choice. You talk about voting. How can somebody be? These people are too stupid to have an ID. It's just like you really think about how our public policy views the American people. Like it's just like parenting or just like any type of psychology. Let's empower people, have the right guardrails, which HSAs have. You can only spend on certain things that are approved, but like let people make their own decisions. So that is something that RFK is talking about, President Trump's talking about. It's actually not that controversial on the left side of the aisle. You know, this is a true kind of bipartisan thing where we should reform entitlement programs to put more money into flexible accounts and let Americans choose. You know, again, nothing should be about like lecturing you to eat organic, but like organic food, if you're pre-diabetic or obese, it's just clinically the best medicine. Like it's just if you're obese and you exercise 4 times a week, you know, get that incentivized and then shift to a high protein, you know, non-ultra processed food diet, you're going to be in a better shape.
Do you think it's a problem with the doctors not knowing that they can even make the recommendations and make a shift? Because sometimes it's just education. Even the doctors themselves, like you said, their go-to is we've been taught that we're supposed to just prescribe. You think if doctors knew more that they would proactively maybe try to shift people towards foods and preventative measures instead?
Yeah, I think there's something really structurally problematic with the way we practice healthcare. I think doctors are good people. There's much easier ways to make money, almost to the person they got in for the right reason. But Casey, you know, after graduating from Stanford Med School, going to surgical residency, my sister, she heard a phrase brandished about all the time, which was "eat what you kill." You know, when she was on her oncology rotation, it's like if somebody, the attending surgeon said, if somebody comes into this appointment room, they're getting a surgery. You know, my mom, sitting across from the senior oncology team at Stanford, who my sister luckily had seen inside those doors, saw her fellow residents crying in the hallways for feeling like they were pushing unnecessary surgery on pancreatic cancer patients. This is rampant, and that oncology team at Stanford was pushing invasive interventions on my mom, who had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They shamed us for walking out without some invasive procedures.
Shamed you?
Shamed us. They said we were going against medical advice. They said we were being reckless with my mom's life. If we went forward with those interventions, she would have been alone in COVID protocols in the hospital. They actually admitted to us that they only had a 33% chance of extending her life a couple more weeks and actually could have done harm. It was this invasive biopsy they needed to get, and it would have taken 14 days to get a result from. My mom died 12 days after that appointment. It wouldn't have even mattered. And those 12 days with my mom were the most powerful 12 days of my life, where we reflected on her life with her, and she reflected with my dad on their incredible life together, and she read hundreds of messages from people she impacted that would have been dying alone in a hospital room. So there's this intense pressure to intervene that just goes to the basic incentives. That is literally how doctors are comped. Like, they are comped based on the amount of procedures. I was speaking to obesity medicine doctor at Harvard recently, and she said that if she could snap her fingers, that she would cure childhood obesity tomorrow, but she has planning for headcount. And if more and more people don't come in with obesity and then get on the lifetime track of needing to come back and get Ozempic and come back and inevitably have other complications, which is horrible with the drug, and they're modeling that out. Like, they have it all modeled. They just built a new center. They got a loan for that new building. The loan is underwritten by increased patients. Like she's got a staff that all has family support. So, you know, I think doctors want to do the right thing, but like, no, I think you need to empower patients with flexible accounts and create some demand in that way. I think, you know, if I could snap my fingers, everything would be controlled by patients. And then you have education happening to educate patients, which I think they're starting to learn, that heart issues and high cholesterol are not a statin deficiency, and, you know, type 2 diabetes or prediabetes is not a metformin deficiency. Actually educate patients and have them being able to push their dollars to different spaces. That will change the system. But as it stands right now, every single doctor in traditional medicine makes money when more people are sicker for longer periods of time, as just a statement of economic fact. So whatever their motivations are, they are, you know, somewhat trapped in that system of 15-minute appointments. And I think this is why that there's a crisis among doctors. The highest burnout rate of any profession, actually an epidemic rate of suicide, the highest suicide rate of any profession.
Because they know.
You're working hard. People working hard on a mission they really believe on. Working hard does not necessarily mean you're going to have like a mental health catastrophe and commit suicide at epidemic rates. That happens when people are working really hard and they know they're not performing and achieving the mission that they got into it for. And that's what's happening in medicine. The New York Times actually had a really interesting article where they compare what's happening in the medical profession to soldiers who are forced to commit war crimes, and actually psychological analysis of the soldiers at Abu Ghraib. That's what's happening to doctors. We have the best, the brightest come to the U.S. medical system. We saddle them with debt. It's all they know how to do. They have all these societal expectations. They basically have one road in life, and they learn too late that the patients aren't getting better, and they're actually not part of the solution, and they get really depressed. Casey saw that throughout the hospital, and Casey, my sister, really had the courage to leave that system. Most people, for various reasons, including the fact that they need to support their families or, important reasons like that, really feel trapped.
It feels like there's this come to Jesus awakening moment happening in a lot of industries, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So in the healthcare market, within the doctors, even technology, I've had a lot of conversation with people that made a lot of money in technology. They're like, maybe we were a little responsible with the way society has gone and the mental health problem that we have with our children and the younger generations. People are realizing that the decisions that they made in pursuit of wealth, status, for their own pride and egos, that maybe it wasn't the best, because whatever the decisions were, they seem to have been amplified and created a huge problem. Do you think that may be what it is? That people just...
1,000%. I mean, listen, I'm very optimistic. Like this isn't happening in China or other countries where people on the most popular podcasts are kind of savaging the incentives in our current system. And I actually think it's a beautiful part of the American system where we lose our way and criticize it vigorously. And I think we have existential challenges with our industrial complexes around education, military, technology, healthcare. But like, I am optimistic that it's being talked about. But yeah, I mean, I say this, and Robert Kennedy has been saying this, and I think Trump has said it now, is that there's nothing more profitable than a sick child. There's nothing more profitable than an addicted child. And you look at the most valuable companies in the world, most of them, I think, fundamentally are preying on our dopamine. And, that's definitely the case with tech. It's the case with a lot of, health companies, which are essentially, I think, drug companies. It's the case with food companies. So yeah, I think that's the case. I think it's okay to have vices. Like I don't think social media should be banned. I don't think Coca-Cola should be banned. I don't think most drugs should be banned. Like I just think we need to from our scientific authorities to talk about the truth. I think there needs to be an accounting of what's happening, and then culture and public policy come from that. I really think that the problem with these industrial complexes is that the leaders have lost their moral clarity. I think like the teachers' unions on education, which I think is a huge industrial complex, that's basically a jobs program and not, it's not geared towards producing a curious, thriving, educated population at this point. It's other interests have kind of co-opted that. So there's, I think, a total, just utter disgraceful lack of leadership from teachers unions. There's a disgraceful lack of leadership from the military authorities, which I think have just I think that the cost of things like the Iraq war, I don't think we fully accounted for it. I mean, the opportunity cost and focus as our kind of main public policy initiative for a decade plus. I mean, it's breathtaking, actually, looking what's happening on the streets of America, and just literally, I mean, it was a waste. I mean, it was a world historical like disaster, and we're still kind of trying to get into more wars. I mean, the military industrial complex and the forces that led to Iraq was one of the worst decisions in world history when you look at the opportunity cost. I mean, just demonstrably, I don't know. I mean, that seems pretty clear at this point. So we haven't fully accounted for that with the healthcare industrial complex that I think led to the worst public policy decision in the past 7 years, which is the COVID lockdowns, which I think we're going to be, dealing with the ramifications of that for the next generation. I think the COVID lockdowns and the mistakes that were made there and the implications for society are, World War II level historical significance, in my opinion. And that was led by the healthcare industry very foreseeably and very clearly letting us down through horrible incentives. We haven't accounted for that. We are just seeing these institutions and these industrial complexes completely fail. And I think hopefully that's why this issue on healthcare is resonating a bit. It's I think it's a forward-looking way to frame this. It's like it's still happening, and it's fine. I think we've gotten away from capitalism. I think we have co-opted institutions. I think we should have a free market, but we should be talking about these issues. These are much more important issues to be talking about than these partisan kind of trivia games that we play that the media kind of tries to get us to divide us.
I think thinking about RFK and Trump, there are rumors and there are stories out there that you were kind of responsible for the two coming together. Is that true? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
So RFK's brought me into it a little bit. I was expecting this to go to the grave, but I can give my side. I was never going to talk about it, but since I've been invoked in it, I'll give
a little bit
the perspective from what I've seen. To me, the story all starts with burying my mom and my sister and I deciding to write this book in 2021. Really feeling we had something important to say, like I said. We started writing this and we started speaking out and we started companies to solve this. Through that advocacy and through great podcasts of people like Tucker, having my sister and me on, we've been able to get the message out. And there's been a real visceral, I think, sense of, oh my gosh, we got to solve this. And just an amazing DMs that I get. Members of Congress in both parties. So my sister and I this year will meet with 100 members of Congress, and we have really powerful meetings. People cry in these meetings. There is a desire to kind of figure this out and stop it, and it's a feeling of leaders that they've really been kind of blinded to this by bad forces. RFK, I've been lucky to be connected with, and obviously, I think the media marginalizes him and tries to slur him. He is in this clearly for anyone that's watching what he's saying to solve the childhood chronic disease crisis. And I think he has done such a contribution in the national debate to bring this to light. And then the Trump campaign, President Trump actually a year ago gave a very powerful speech on getting to the bottom of why kids are getting so sick and has been talking about this for over a year. And I have been in touch with his staff, who is very passionate about this issue and wants to get to the bottom of it and wants it to be a legacy issue. So that was the context. After President Trump was shot, the attempted assassination, I felt a spiritual urge almost that to do whatever I could to foster unity, because I felt from my preparation and just experience with politics that there are these moments that can change things. Frankly, like dramatic moments, like 9/11, for better or worse, the neocons were ready and they were able to do the Iraq War. With the COVID, the pharma industry was ready to do the lockdowns and to really test and I think have a prep kind of of keeping us in fear and keeping us controlled. Like forces were ready, and when they can jump on moments for good or bad, it really matters. And this Trump assassination attempt was a moment where the deck could be reshuffled. And I just felt the urge to call Robert and say that. And from my perspective, what I saw is that Robert Kennedy is in this to push the issue of childhood health and really serve and honor the movement that he's built. It is not about him. It's not about the campaign. It is about doing, he said this, he said he prays every single day for 19 years to figure out and be in a position to reverse the childhood chronic disease crisis. So he has always been thinking about that. I was able to have a conversation with him about that. And I offered to try to connect him with President Trump. He thought about it, called me back, said he would like to discuss unity and just discuss these concepts. And I worked, this is all reported, I thought this was going to go to the grave, but then worked with Tucker to connect them that night. And this is all these two. I'm a very small footnote in this, and I will just say one thing from my limited vantage point, which is that this was about the issue of childhood chronic disease. These two men spent hours and hours and hours talking about why our kids are so diabetic and so sick. And they did not talk about polling, and they did not talk about horse trading. And there was not like political consultants, doing analysis. This was a true like connection on what I believe, my personal opinion, is really the true driver of why President Trump, whatever you think of him, is the dominant figure in American life over the past decade. It's because he's channeled frustration among his voters about our institutions letting us down. And that rationale of his candidacy is correct. Like his reason he has such a connection with his voters to such a historical degree is because of a correct thesis, which is that our institutions are letting them down. And I think from my small vantage point, they connected over this idea that actually healthcare and why our kids are getting so sick and profiting our largest industries is actually an example of what I think RFK and Trump have communicated better than any two politicians I've ever seen, which is just like why are institutions letting us down, and they connected on that. So it took weeks of conversation, but just as I think this is a bipartisan issue, and this week in DC I'm going to be meeting with a lot of people from both sides of the party, and we need to be very clear it's a bipartisan issue. We also should be really clear that when politicians bring such existential topics to the top of the national conversation, we should not be deterred from praising them. Everybody should be praising President Trump and RFK for standing up at rallies and talking about regenerative agriculture, for talking about taking our toxins out of our environment, out of our food. These are really, really important big topics. And it is a very positive development that a major presidential campaign is talking about these macro issues.
And I mean, we've mentioned President Trump and RFK Jr., who are kind of almost championing this as part of their platform, something they're talking a lot about, thinking about, and I appreciate that greatly. On the other side, who are maybe some people that are really interested in this and have shown that they actually care?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's Democrats that are really trying to do the right thing. I mean, I've met with Cory Booker a number of times, and he's been a good leader on the food system. I think wants to do the right thing. I mean, President Biden has considered signing some of the same executive orders Trump has signed. I mean, these are all things: HSA expansion, taking corruption out of our guidelines, changing our broken agriculture incentives. Theoretically, right? These are things that resonate with people on the left and the right. I mean, we've engaged with the White House. I would encourage the White House. It would be politically smart for them to steal what RFK and Trump are talking about and doing it now. I would ask why they're not doing that, honestly, if they don't. But I have an open line with anyone who will want to listen. And my political 2 cents is that this is the issue people care about. This is an issue that a rally for Bernie Sanders or a rally for President Trump, people viscerally start cheering when we talk about not poisoning our kids and talk about the corruption that leads to that. It's a jump ball. It's the uniparty versus the American people. It's not left or right. And, it would perplex me, quite frankly, if Democrats didn't try to steal this issue that Trump and RFK are talking about. They should. There's no reason they shouldn't. And I think any politician who doesn't speak clearly about this issue, it is appropriate to ask what's going on. Like, why? I mean, where my head goes to is that Pharma is the single greatest funder of politicians themselves. They spend 5 times more on political donations than the oil industry, the media, academic research institutions, civil rights groups. They're the largest funder of the NAACP. And the NAACP is now a registered lobbyist for Ozempic, saying it's a social justice assault and racist not to have government funding for Ozempic. I mean, you have to ask what's happening if a politician can't speak clearly about healthy food and healthy environment for children.
But your proposed plan, your 3-point plan, is pretty straightforward and basic and very common sense.
Yeah.
But you're also talking about completely usurping and flipping over how the system currently works. I mean, it seems simple in theory, but really, it's a really radical change from how things are done.
It is radical. It is radical.
Possible?
I
guess that's the real question.
It could happen tomorrow. It's easy to do. It is very easy to sign, and I have them. There are 2 pages. Signing an executive order saying that the USDA Nutrition Guideline Committee can't take money from food companies is easy. Signing an executive order saying that NIH needs to refocus on core foundational research and not have 80% of their grants be going to conflicted researchers who are profiting from people being sick, not studying why people are getting sick. That can be reoriented tomorrow with the right personnel and right executive orders. Having an executive order saying no longer is the FDA going to be 75% funded by pharma, that can be done tomorrow. These things can be done tomorrow. You can spur HSA expansion tomorrow through executive orders, and you can sign an executive order saying that SNAP can't go to diabetes water, aka Coca-Cola, tomorrow. So no, like just those things alone would do a lot of things. You could sign an executive order tomorrow saying that no longer can the United States be the only country in the world, New Zealand somewhat, but really the US is essentially the only country that allows the pharmaceutical industry to co-opt our information sources, to do direct consumer advertising, to be 50% of mainstream TV news funding. I mean, it's unfathomable. You wonder why the news doesn't report these stories. All these things can be done quickly. As far as being radical, yeah, I mean, unwinding our sick care system, which is fuels the largest industry, the most employment of any industry. Yeah, I mean, there'll be opposition to that. In some sense, it's not radical. What I'm not actually saying we need to shift everything to healthy eating and exercise. I am saying something very unradical, which is that our medical standards of care should follow the appropriate clinical guidelines. It is clinically inaccurate the moment somebody has slightly high cholesterol to prescribe them drugs and not incentivize them to perform better lifestyle habits. Mathematically, we are not going to drug our way to a better budget and better health. It's not going to happen. That empirically is just so obvious. We are on track to be an infertile, fat, unhealthy, and depressed population while bankrupting our country because healthcare costs are the largest source of our budget and growing at 2 times the rate of GDP growth and going to be 40% of costs in 15 years. It's growing at an increasing rate right now. It's going to bankrupt the country while producing worse results and a non-competitive infertile population. Mathematically, we have to change this. And to me, it really is simple. We do not change it by injecting and drugging everyone. We have to actually get healthier as a country. So it has to be changing our clinical guidelines to actually produce health, not profit from people being sick. It's going to have to happen eventually. So, and it will be disruptive to the current sick care system. But you tell me, I just don't see any other way. We really have a problem here.
You're proposing taking money away from the pharmaceutical companies. You're proposing taking money away from the media companies. You're proposing taking money away from the lobbyists. You're proposing taking money away from the politicians. You're proposing taking money away from the healthcare system, the doctors, and the surgeons. These are the biggest industries in the world, and you're proposing that you take money away from them. I can't imagine they're going to be happy about that.
They're powerful industries. And I think you do bring up, it's something we should be very clear about. The degree of change that we need and the degree of the problem we have will probably facilitate some short-term economic dislocation. It is not good that America spends $14,000 per capita on healthcare per American per year. And that being 3 times more than an average European country, producing worse results. We literally die 6 years younger than a Spaniard or an Italian. I mean, it's really, really high. So that's not good. It is unfortunate and really part of the problem that so many people profit from the sick care system, and there'll be dislocations. How I'd frame it is we're not taking money away from anyone, and we're frankly not even saying that the world and medical guidelines should be anti-drug. There should be a firm flag in the ground that for the chronic conditions that are costing 90% of medical costs, 9 out of 10 leading killers of Americans, that we should follow the science. Like, to me, it is about following the science. And obviously, with our medical incentives, we should not be going straight to drugs. We should not be playing whack-a-mole with the problem. Like, that's what the book's about. That's what our whole thesis is about. Like, my sister, graduating medical school, chose one of 42 medical specialties like every other doctor. We silo the body of disease into different areas, and those doctors don't talk to each other. And that's why so many Americans are on so many different drugs, playing whack-a-mole with so many different symptoms that are actually the same thing at the end of the day. They're all tied to our body not producing energy correctly and cellular dysfunction caused by our environment and our food and our habits. Like, we just have to recognize that scientific reality, which I actually think, if you push most doctors on, isn't even controversial. So in a sense, the way I'd message it is, it's just a demand to follow the science and take our medical budget, empower Americans to have choice with where that goes, and empower them to figure out the right path with their doctor and have flexibility with where their funds go, and have medical guidance and research guidance that's not corrupted. Like, so in a sense, I don't think that's that radical. And I think you can frame it the right way. I think the American people are behind that. But I think the big threat here is it just will. I think when our health becomes it's a jobs program. I mean, I was down in I think it was Alabama. There was a billboard that said, hiring nurses, no criminal background check. There's such a demand and voracious appetite to, like, hire people in this industry. This is just this big jobs program. Yeah, I mean that's always tough. I mean, 78% of U.S. states, the biggest employer in the state is either a healthcare entity or Walmart, which is the largest food retailer.
We talked a lot about children because young dad. I also have older parents. And my parents, for example, they take all the drugs that the doctors tell them to take, and they try to eat healthy, but still, they have conditions as they get older. Can they just turn it around?
Oh, quickly. You can turn around metabolic dysfunction very, very quickly. I think it was a massive missed opportunity when COVID, which was really a disease that preyed on our immune system, that we didn't talk about how Americans died at multiples higher rates than other countries because our immune systems were so weak. And everyone's like, well, that would have been a longer term solve, like getting healthier, eating healthier, exercising. The first chapter of part 2, where we go into a plan, is about blood tests. The key to any patient of any age, and my dad's working on this right now, who's almost 80, is get your blood tests, and we go through more that you should ask for, and you can do that cheaply through various new sources you can find online, where you can get functional medicine blood tests and readouts really, really well. That's really the key baseline of, like, where your risks are, and it's not complicated. We go through in the book, and you can Google. I mean, it's not rocket science, but you'll have some nutrient deficiencies. Obviously your weight, your cholesterol. You can actually create a plan then to start gamifying and getting those biomarkers more under control, and you can get those biomarkers much improved in a quarter. Like this can change really, really quickly. So that's the key. I mean, for any age, it's getting the data and then creating a plan to improve that data, and your various, the basics like HDL, triglycerides, blood pressure, blood sugar, waist size, and then we get into some deeper ones. These are the most predominant indicators of your future risk for disease and future health. So, no, there's stories in the book about older Americans turning around their life, and no, it's never too late. Got to exercise though. Got to strength training is so important for older people. They should be lifting weights.
Really?
Lifting weights is so important.
Not just take your afternoon weekend stroll,
which is very important. Oh, that's huge. I mean, taking that stroll and taking that daily stroll is really, really important. 1,000%, especially if it's got some hills. And it couldn't recommend that more. But weight training, muscles deteriorate as we age. there are glucose sponges. There's this organ that's so important for our metabolic functioning and health, and the inevitable decline. Also, falls are actually one of the biggest causes of death for elderly people. And just being able to, stand up, to squat, to prevent falls or prevent injury from falls, it's huge. So get your blood test, create a food and supplement plan to improve your biomarkers, and then strength training, it would be very, very important.
And I'm glad that there's someone out there doing the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Because it's not easy. Again, you're picking up a lot of enemies along the way. People are calling you from Davos, pissed off, telling you they're going to ruin your career. It's not an easy thing to do. And you're out there doing the real work, which is put yourself out there, put your name out there, put your face out there, and challenge some of the largest institutions in the world. Man, I just appreciate your time. I appreciate you doing what you do. If anyone watching wants to check out Calley, definitely go do that. Check out the book because, again, I think this is going to change the world.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks for telling the truth.
Hey, thank you, Calley.
Thank you.